Have you ever felt that specific tightness in your chest when someone's words wrap around your thoughts like a vice? When you find yourself justifying your choices to people who have no right to demand explanation? When you replay conversations at night, searching for the moment you lost control of the interaction? Maybe you tell yourself you're just being considerate, empathetic, careful not to hurt others. But what if I told you that every time you feel that tightness, you're not being kind, you're being controlled? What if your empathy isn't a gift, but a vulnerability that emotional predators can see from across a room? Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote in his private journals, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He understood something most people never grasp, that emotional manipulation only works because you've handed someone else the remote control to your internal state. This video is for you who exhaust yourself managing other people's emotions, for you who can feel when someone is weaponizing guilt, playing victim, or twisting your words, but still find yourself apologizing. I'm going to walk you through why you're vulnerable to manipulation, the Stoic mechanism that explains it, and then 3 concrete steps to become psychologically immune. Not by building walls, but by understanding what the Stoics discovered 2,000 years ago. Let's begin. You believe you're being manipulated because you're too nice, too caring, too empathetic. But the truth is more disturbing. The Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, understood something fundamental about human psychology that modern neuroscience has only recently confirmed. The only thing you truly control is your faculty of judgment. Everything else, other people's emotions, their reactions, their attempts to make you feel guilty or afraid or obligated, exists outside your control. What Epictetus called the dichotomy of control is actually the fundamental mechanism that determines whether you can be manipulated or not. Marcus Aurelius saw that most human suffering comes not from external events, but from our judgments about those events. When someone attempts to manipulate you emotionally, they're not actually doing anything to you. They're attempting to control your judgment, to make you believe their emergency is your responsibility, their anger is your fault, their disappointment is your failure. The real problem is not that you're too empathetic. The real problem is that you haven't separated what belongs to you from what belongs to them. Here's how it works. When someone uses guilt, passive aggression, or emotional volatility to control your behavior, they're exploiting a cognitive error the Stoics identified centuries ago. You're treating their internal state as if it's within your sphere of control. When your mother sighs heavily and says, "I guess I'll just be alone on my birthday." When your partner gives you the silent treatment after you set a boundary. When your friend plays victim after you say no, they're all doing the same thing. They're externalizing their emotional regulation and making it your job. And here's what makes this so insidious. You've been trained since childhood to believe that managing other people's emotions is your responsibility. Every time someone was upset and you scrambled to fix it, every time someone was disappointed and you absorbed their pain as your own, you reinforced a neural pathway that says, "Their feelings are my jurisdiction." Every time you apologize for someone else's reaction, you are actually strengthening your own psychological enslavement. You think you're being compassionate, but you're really collaborating with your own manipulation. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." What this means for you is that the person trying to manipulate you has no power except what you grant them through your judgment that their emotion should control your action. But it gets darker. Because the people who manipulate you emotionally aren't necessarily doing it consciously. Often they're simply repeating patterns that worked for them in the past, patterns that trained you to be responsible for their internal weather. And the most dangerous manipulators are the ones who genuinely believe their feelings justify controlling you. The ones who've convinced themselves that if they're hurt, someone must fix it, and that someone is you. Perhaps you're already feeling that familiar discomfort, that voice saying, "But what if they really need me?" That's not compassion speaking. That's the manipulation speaking through you, using your own voice. And here's where it gets truly disturbing. You've internalized the manipulator. Even when they're not present, you're manipulating yourself on their behalf. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel, because this channel is where we dismantle the psychological games that keep you emotionally enslaved. Thank you for your support. But here's the question no one asks. Why are some people immune to emotional manipulation while others seem to attract it constantly? That's what we need to understand next. So why does this happen? The surface answer is that you're too sensitive, too caring, that you need thicker skin. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is that you never learned what Epictetus called the fundamental distinction, the difference between what is up to us and what is not up to us. Epictetus, who spent the first part of his life as a slave, understood something profound about psychological freedom. What he described as to Reframe, the things in our power, is actually the only sphere of reality where you have any control whatsoever. This includes your judgments, your impulses, your desires, and your aversions. Everything else, reputation, body, property, and crucially, other people's emotions and reactions, exists outside your control entirely. Here's what's really happening inside your psyche when someone manipulates you emotionally. First, they present an emotion or reaction as if it's a fact about you rather than a choice they're making. When they say, "You're making me feel guilty," or "You're hurting me by setting that boundary," they're performing a linguistic sleight of hand. They're treating their internal response as if it's causally connected to your action, as if you're pulling the strings of their emotional state. And you believe them, then once you've accepted responsibility for their emotion, you automatically accept responsibility for fixing it. This is the trap. The moment you think, "I made them feel this way," you've entered their sphere of control and exited your own. You're now trying to control something that was never yours to control, their internal state, while abandoning the one thing you do control, your judgment about whether their emotion should dictate your behavior. Finally, this pattern becomes automated. Your nervous system learns to scan for signs of others' displeasure, to preemptively manage their emotions, to sacrifice your boundaries before they even have to ask. You become a prediction machine for other people's feelings, constantly calculating how to avoid triggering their manipulation tactics. And this happens entirely outside your conscious awareness. And the most disturbing part? This makes you the perfect target for people who've learned to weaponize emotion. They can sense it on you. The way you over-explain, the way you apologize preemptively, the way your energy shifts when they show the slightest displeasure. These are signals that you're still trying to control what cannot be controlled. Do you see it now? Every time you feel guilty for someone else's disappointment, every time you scramble to fix someone else's anger, you're attempting the impossible. You're trying to control their faculty of judgment, which belongs entirely to them. Because Marcus Aurelius knew this 2,000 years ago. He wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." This is why you feel exhausted after interactions with certain people. Not because you're too sensitive, but because you're attempting a form of psychological labor that violates the fundamental structure of consciousness. You cannot control another person's internal state any more than you can control the weather. And yet you've been trying to do exactly that, probably for decades. Let me give you an example. Sarah is a client who came to me emotionally devastated because her mother used the silent treatment whenever Sarah set boundaries. Sarah would call, text, apologize, explain herself for days, sometimes weeks, trying to fix her mother's mood. She believed this was her responsibility because her mother's silence made her feel like a bad daughter. Pause for a second and notice, who right now are you managing emotionally? Whose mood are you responsible for in your mind? Here's what was actually happening with Sarah. Sarah's mother was presenting her internal choice to withdraw and punish, as if it were Sarah's creation, and Sarah accepted that frame. She took ownership of her mother's emotional state, which meant she also took on the impossible task of controlling it. The manipulation worked perfectly because Sarah didn't understand the dichotomy of control. What belonged to Sarah? Her decision to set a boundary, her judgment about what behavior she would accept, her choice about how to respond to silence. What belonged to her mother? Her emotional reaction, her choice to withdraw, her decision to use silence as punishment, her judgment about what Sarah's boundary meant. But Sarah was trying to control both sides. She was abandoning her own sphere, her right to set boundaries, to attempt control over her mother's sphere, her emotional reactions. And this is the mechanism of all emotional manipulation, getting you to surrender what is yours to control while making you responsible for what you cannot control. But here's where most people stop. They hear this and they think, okay, I'll just stop caring what others feel. And that's exactly what keeps them trapped in another form of the same error. The Stoics called this Apatheia, but not in the way most people understand it. And what I'm about to tell you next changes everything about how you understand emotional immunity. So what do? Build walls? Become cold and indifferent? Stop caring about people's feelings altogether? No, that's still operating from a misunderstanding of what the Stoics actually taught. That's not freedom from manipulation. That's just another prison made of reactivity and fear. The real solution is what the Stoics called prosoche, rigorous attention to the present moment and constant vigilance over your faculty of judgment. And it requires something most people aren't willing to do. Take complete responsibility for the one thing you can control while releasing all responsibility for what you cannot. Prosoche is the practice of catching yourself in the moment of judgment and asking, is this mine to control? It's not a one-time decision. It's a moment-by-moment practice of distinguishing between your sphere of control and everything else. The Stoics understood that freedom from manipulation doesn't come from changing others, avoiding certain people, or suppressing your emotions. It comes from maintaining absolute clarity about what belongs to you. Marcus Aurelius called this maintaining the citadel, protecting your inner fortress of judgment from external siege. It's the process of becoming so clear about the boundaries of your control that manipulation attempts simply have nowhere to land. But don't mistake this for detachment or coldness. This is the most psychologically demanding work you'll ever do. Here's what this looks like in practice. Step 1. Install the prejudgment filter. This means developing a split-second pause between stimulus and response where you ask, whose domain is this? When someone expresses disappointment in your choice, before you react, you pause and identify. Their disappointment is theirs. My choice is mine. Their disappointment cannot determine my choice unless I judge that it should. This means getting specific about the mechanism. When your partner says, I can't believe you're choosing work over me tonight, they're presenting a narrative about what your choice means. That narrative is their judgment, not reality. Your choice to work tonight is yours. Their interpretation of that choice is theirs. Their emotional response to their interpretation is theirs. The only thing that belongs to you is, do I judge that I should work tonight? And do I judge that their disappointment should change my decision? The Stoics practiced this through a technique called morning and evening meditation. Every morning, Marcus Aurelius would mentally rehearse the day ahead and identify potential situations where someone might try to influence his judgments. He would preemptively decide, if someone is angry with me, that anger is theirs. If someone tries to manipulate me through guilt, that guilt is theirs. My job is to maintain clarity about my own judgments. Every evening, he would review the day and identify moments where he failed to maintain this distinction. Step 2. Reframe manipulation attempts as information. When someone uses emotional manipulation, they're actually giving you incredibly valuable information about their own internal state and their beliefs about how relationships should work. They're showing you that they believe emotions justify control, that their discomfort obligates your compliance, that love means never feeling disappointed. This means when your friend plays victim after you can't attend their event, instead of scrambling to manage their feelings, you observe, This person believes their attendance desires should override my schedule. This person is attempting to make their disappointment my responsibility. This tells me about their model of friendship, not about my value as a friend. You're not judging them as bad people. You're simply seeing clearly what's happening. The Stoics called this phantasiae katalepticae, clear, accurate impressions. You're getting the facts right before you add emotional weight to them. The manipulation attempt is just information. This person has these expectations, uses these tactics, holds these beliefs. This reframe changes everything because you stop taking the manipulation personally. You see it as what it is, their strategy for meeting their needs, their learned behavior, their judgment about how to get what they want. None of which determines your response unless you judge that it should. Step 3. Return responsibility to its rightful owner. This is the step most people can't stomach because it feels cruel. When someone tries to make their emotion your responsibility, you explicitly and clearly return it to them. Not with anger, not with defensiveness, but with calm clarity. This means saying, "I understand you're disappointed. That's difficult." And then stopping. No scrambling to fix it, no over-explaining your choice, no absorbing their emotion as your problem to solve. You acknowledge their experience, and then you hold the boundary that their experience is theirs to manage. When they escalate, and they will, because returning responsibility feels like abandonment to people accustomed to outsourcing emotional regulation, you repeat, "I hear that this is hard for you, and I'm not available to make different choices to manage your disappointment." The language matters here. You're not saying they're wrong to feel disappointed. You're saying their disappointment doesn't determine your availability, your choices, or your behavior. You're maintaining the dichotomy of control with absolute precision. But I need to be honest with you about what happens when you start practicing this. It feels like you're becoming a terrible person. Every instinct you've developed, every social conditioning you've absorbed will scream that you're being cruel, selfish, cold. People who benefited from your porous boundaries will accuse you of exactly these things. Marcus Aurelius knew this wasn't going to make you popular. He understood it was going to cost you relationships with people who required your psychological enslavement to feel comfortable. In his meditations, he wrote constantly about the loneliness of maintaining philosophical principles in a world that runs on different rules. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. What he meant was that the very resistance you'll face, the guilt trips that escalate, the relationships that fall away, the accusations of being different now, these are not problems. They're proof that you're doing it right. When you begin this process, several things will happen. First, you'll feel like a monster. Every time you hold a boundary while someone expresses disappointment, every time you let someone experience the natural consequences of their own choices without rescuing them, every time you refuse to take responsibility for managing someone else's emotional state, you'll feel guilty. This guilt is not evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you're violating deeply conditioned patterns. The Stoics would tell you to observe that guilt with interest. Recognize it as a judgment you're making. I should manage their feelings. And then consciously choose a different judgment. Then you'll experience what I call the sacred loneliness. People who've known you as someone they could manipulate won't recognize this version of you. They'll say you've changed, you've become cold, you're not the person they thought you were. And they're right, you're not. You're no longer volunteering to be responsible for their internal weather. Some relationships will end, some will transform, and you'll spend time alone while you recalibrate your entire relational operating system. Finally, you'll discover a kind of freedom most people never experience. You'll walk into interactions knowing that nothing anyone says or does can disturb your inner citadel unless you judge that it should. You'll feel other people's attempts at manipulation like a gentle breeze against stone, present, noticed, but incapable of moving you. You'll develop what the Stoics called ataraxia, freedom from disturbance, not because you don't care, but because you finally understood what you control and what you don't. And this is where most people stop. They feel the guilt, they experience the social consequences, and they retreat back to being responsible for everyone else's emotional state because that feels like love. But you're not most people. If you're still here, it's because you're finally ready to understand that real love doesn't require you to surrender your judgment. Real connection doesn't demand that you control the uncontrollable. You're ready to become what the Stoics called the sage, psychologically free while remaining emotionally present. If this is too confronting, you can stop here. But if you're ready to go deeper into how to maintain this practice, when your entire nervous system is screaming at you to go back to old patterns, stay with me. But what happens after you cross this threshold? What exists on the other side when you've truly internalized the dichotomy of control? That's what changes everything. When you complete this process, when you've walked through the Stoic discipline of maintaining your citadel against manipulation attempts, something fundamental shifts inside you. You stop rehearsing conversations before they happen, gaming out every possible reaction, preparing defenses for boundaries you haven't even set yet. You cease scanning rooms for signs of displeasure, reading micro-expressions for hints of disappointment, adjusting your behavior preemptively to avoid triggering someone's emotional weapon. You no longer experience that crushing weight in your chest when someone withdraws, goes silent, or expresses hurt at your choices. Instead, you develop what feels like a force field around your judgment. When someone attempts guilt, you notice it. You're not oblivious, not cold, but it simply has no traction. You observe their tactic the way you'd observe a chess move. Interesting. They're using disappointment to influence my decision about Sunday dinner. And then you calmly execute your own judgment, regardless of whether it pleases them. You become capable of saying no without the no echoing in your mind for days afterward, wondering if you were too harsh, too selfish, too much. You set boundaries and then, this is the remarkable part, you move on with your day. The boundary doesn't haunt you. You don't compulsively check your phone to see if they've responded, if they're angry, if you need to preemptively repair something. You start experiencing your own presence in the room differently. Where you used to shrink or expand based on others' moods, you now occupy steady space. Your emotional state becomes yours again, sourced from your own judgments rather than borrowed from everyone around you. When someone is angry in your vicinity, you're no longer automatically angry or anxious. You simply observe, a person is experiencing anger. That's their experience, not mine. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. For let your impulse be in your own power." You finally understand what this means at a cellular level. Your impulses, your choices, your responses belong to you. Not to your mother's silence, not to your partner's disappointment, not to your friend's victim narrative. And here's what's interesting. People will notice. They'll say you've become selfish. They'll accuse you of not caring anymore, of being distant, of having changed for the worse. Some will use the language of mental health weaponized. "You're being really boundaried right now," said with the same tone they'd use for "you're being really unreasonable right now." And this is not a problem. This is proof. It's working. Because the Stoics understood that people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will never celebrate you developing them. Those who've outsourced their emotional regulation to you will experience your refusal to manage their feelings as abandonment. They'll escalate their manipulation tactics. The guilt will get more extreme, the silent treatments longer, the accusations more cutting, because what worked before isn't working now, and they're hoping that increasing the intensity will break through your defenses. Your presence alone will force people to confront something they've been avoiding, their own responsibility for their internal state. Your refusal to absorb their emotions will create a mirror they don't want to look into. Your boundaries will reveal who was in relationship with you versus who was in relationship with your willingness to be manipulated. And you'll discover something the Stoics knew intimately, that psychological freedom often comes with social isolation. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire and wrote constantly about loneliness, about being surrounded by people who didn't understand what he was trying to practice, who thought his philosophical discipline was coldness rather than clarity. If this feels brutal, that's because your nervous system is detoxing from a lifetime of emotional enmeshment. You're not regressing, you're withdrawing from an addiction to managing what you cannot control, but that isolation becomes a different kind of connection to yourself. You start having thoughts and not immediately questioning whether those thoughts will upset someone. You start making choices based on your own judgment rather than a predictive algorithm of everyone else's reactions. You begin to understand what Epictetus meant when he said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." The relationships that remain after this transformation are fundamentally different. They're relationships between two people who each maintain their own citadel, who each take responsibility for their own emotional state, who each understand that love doesn't mean surrendering judgment. These relationships have a kind of clean air to them, no hidden agendas, no covert contracts, no wondering if you're about to trigger a punishment you didn't see coming. This is not becoming unfeeling, this is becoming unmanipulable. Marcus Aurelius loved deeply. His meditations are full of affection for people, gratitude for teachers, concern for the welfare of citizens. But he loved from a position of inner sovereignty, not from a position of emotional hostage. He understood that real care for others doesn't require you to let them control you. The Stoics called this achieving apatheia, but not in the modern sense of apathy. Apathy says, "I don't feel anything." Apatheia says, "I feel, but I'm not ruled." They meant freedom from being disturbed by external events, the ability to maintain your judgment regardless of what's happening around you. The state of the sage who can remain psychologically free even while caring deeply about people and outcomes. And it doesn't start tomorrow. It doesn't start when you're ready, when you've read more books, when you feel strong enough. It starts now, in this moment. With the choice you make after this video ends about whether you're going to maintain the dichotomy of control or surrender it the next time someone expresses disappointment in your direction. Choose one relationship where you'll run the pre-judgment filter in your next interaction. Just one. That's where this stops being theory and becomes the foundation of your psychological sovereignty. But there's one final thing you need to understand. Something the Stoics knew that changes everything about how you approach this transformation. If you've made it this far, it's not by accident. The Stoics believe that nothing that happens to the prepared mind is random. If you're here, it's because you're ready to reclaim what belongs to you. Your judgment, your choices, your internal citadel that no one else has the right to occupy. If you want this to become more than just an interesting idea, do this with me. Now I want you to do something. Write in the comments, "I choose my fortress." This isn't for me. It's for the part of you that's done being controlled. Because the Stoics understood that spoken commitment, making your intention public, transforms abstract philosophy into lived practice. When you write those words, you're performing the first act of maintaining your citadel. You're declaring to yourself and to others that you're no longer available to be psychologically controlled through emotion. This is your declaration, your line in the sand. The moment you stop being responsible for what you cannot control and start being responsible for the only thing you can, your faculty of judgment. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He spent decades practicing this single insight, returning to it every morning, every evening, in moment after moment of imperial pressure and attempted manipulation. He knew that psychological freedom isn't a destination you reach. It's a discipline you practice until it becomes who you are. When you walk away from this video, you'll be tested. Someone will express disappointment. Someone will use silence as a weapon. Someone will make their emergency your obligation, and in that moment, you'll have a choice. Return to the familiar pattern of trying to control their emotional state, or maintain your citadel and let them experience the natural consequences of their own judgments. The Stoics would tell you that this moment, this exact test, is not your obstacle. It's your opportunity. Every manipulation attempt that fails to move you is evidence of your growing immunity. Every boundary you hold despite guilt is a repetition that strengthens the neural pathway of freedom. And don't stop here. The next video explores what the Stoics understood about toxic empathy, how your capacity for feeling others' emotions becomes a weapon against you when you don't understand the mechanics of compassion without compliance. It's waiting for you, not by accident, but because the path to psychological sovereignty requires understanding not just how to resist manipulation, but how to love without surrender. You're not just watching psychology anymore. You're rebuilding your identity from the inside out. You've already begun. The question is, will you continue?